New chapter today in what is a test case for the Trump administration and its multi-front assault on activities long protected by our First Amendment. Journalist Don Lemon pleaded not guilty in court to 2 counts. They include conspiracy against right of religious freedom. He was charged after covering a protest at a church in St. Paul, Minnesota last month. Here's what he had to say after his arraignment today.
The power and protection of the First Amendment has been the underpinning of my work. The First Amendment, the freedom of the press, the bedrock of our democracy. The events before my arrest and what's happened since show that people are finally realizing what this administration is all about. The process is the punishment with them. And like all of you here in Minnesota, the great people of Minnesota, I will not be intimidated. I will not back down. I will fight these baseless charges, and I will not be silenced.
Don Lemon faces, in effect, a civil rights case, and one so flimsy that many attorneys who used to work at the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division believe it will ultimately be dismissed. Legal experts telling CBS News this, quote, "The indictment against journalist Don Lemon and 8 others will likely be dismissed because it hinges on a charge that is viewed as so constitutionally flawed that the Justice Department Civil Rights Division has never attempted to use it to prosecute interference in a house of worship. That novel theory of the law comes on top of a set of alternative facts presented in the actual indictment by the Justice Department. On that, the Washington Post reports this, quote, "The January 29th indictment calls the 9 defendants agitators and says they, quote, entered the church in a coordinated takeover-style attack. In multiple instances, it describes the alleged conduct of the 2 journalists and the protesters collectively. Experts said that if Lemon was operating as a journalist during the January 8th protest at City's Church in St. Paul, rather than as a participant, that could undermine accusations that he was part of a conspiracy or that he intended to interfere with protected rights. During the approximately 45 minutes that Lemon live-streamed at the church, he conducted interviews and repeatedly identified himself as a reporter, while also voicing sympathy for the protesters' cause. But the facts of the case and the law underpinning the case are, of course, secondary to what Donald Trump is trying to achieve here. As Don Lemon himself puts it, quote, "The process is the punishment." So whatever happens in this case, the Trump administration is doing what Don Lemon said they're doing. They're hoping to intimidate Don Lemon and other members of the press, as well as anyone who dares to cover the truth or point out the truth or criticize Donald Trump. They're hoping to raise the cost of speaking out to the point where fewer and fewer people actually do it. As Senator Alyssa Slotkin said about the case the Justice Department tried to bring against her and failed to do, quote, "The intimidation was the point, to get other people beyond us to think twice about speaking out." The case today is also part and parcel of a war against institutions we're seeing waged all over the country. Here's how Senator Cory Booker puts it.
Well, I'm seeing an abuse of the rule of law, abuse of the power of the justice system in ways that are stunning. And it didn't start with this incident. Remember, they arrested the mayor of my city. The judge laughed it out of court, but they put him in handcuffs. They detained him for hours. We see them attacking members of the media with the arrest of Don Lemon in a way that we have never seen before. So we are now in this constitutional crisis where we have a Justice Department and a Department of Homeland Security that are using their police powers in ways that I think most Americans never would imagine that they would be seeing. Even in the United States Senate, where I've seen Alex Padilla thrown to the ground and put in handcuffs, where Adam Schiff has trumped up charges where they're focusing on. Even the head of the Fed suddenly found himself under criminal investigation by the FBI. All of us should be alarmed by what is happening to our rights and to the Constitution. They're going after senators. They're going after people in our communities. It is, to me, a constitutional crisis.
Charges against journalist Don Lemon, marking a new stage in the Trump administration's war on the press, is where we start today. President of Media Matters for America, Angelo Carasone, is here. Also joining us, Puck News senior political columnist, national affairs analyst John Heilman is back, and former assistant special agent in charge at the FBI, national security and intelligence analyst Michael Feinberg is also back. He is also a fellow at Lawfare. Angelo, I want to start with you, and I don't want to put you on the spot here, but I know your organization has been targeted Don Lemon has long been someone who got under Donald Trump's skin. Donald Trump, at least, believes that he's part of the reason that Don Lemon is no longer at CNN. I'm not sure that's rooted in too much truth. Donald Trump's attacks against the press are legendary. They're incessant. And what is different, I suppose, is that in 2.0, he has the free rein to use the Justice Department to intimidate, threaten, cause journalists and media organizations to incur massive legal fees. And I just wonder if you can speak to this moment in this part of the Trump story, which is a little opaque to people not experiencing this.
Yeah, I mean, there's something you said during your intro really resonated. You know, obviously the process is the punishment, but there was another part that stuck out to me, which is that experts say that, you know, that the government is unlikely to succeed in these prosecutions. Sure. But it's still extraordinarily painful. Experts have been saying that about my situation for a couple of years now, and I'm still knee deep in it every day. And, you know, and I have confidence in those experts' assessments, but that doesn't change the calculus here. They are willing to do these extraordinary things because they recognize that the process itself is the punishment, and the intention is to stop, you know, opponents or those they view as opposition from doing that work, so that they then can get even they can even execute their plans and their intentions faster, stronger, longer, you know, be more effective. So that, I mean, it's a real thing, and you know, it has lots of reverberations and broader consequences. And underneath all of that is that they didn't just have an intention to go after journalists; they had a plan. They did have a plan, and that plan was everything from, you know, at a foundational level, changing over and breaking norms at the Department of Justice and getting rid of the people that would even try to uphold those norms, so that then you could start to do these kinds of things. You know, this prosecution effort is one step in their larger assaults against journalists, but they've done a whole bunch of other stuff too. They've made it easier to subpoena records, to get all kinds of investigations into journalists. They rescinded a whole bunch of rules and protections at the DOJ when it came to sniffing around what journalists were doing. All that's gone. And so the exposure is there, and the tools are there for them to use that exposure to then attack and go after opponents. And day in, day out, we see sort of people, you know, folding, I mean, broadly speaking. But then there are fighters, and that's the important thing we shouldn't lose sight of. People like Don Lemon and others that didn't just immediately cop a deal, that are out there making advocacy work, you know, Media Matters and others. And that's what we have to do. We have to just continue to fight ahead.
Let me unpack each of those points that Angela makes. There's the they've operationalized the smear, the target, and then turning the government on the targets in the press. This is sort of what that pipeline looks like. These are right-wing media figures calling for Don Lemon's arrest.
And so this is, you know, hopefully just the beginning. And as we know, Don Lemon needs to be the next to fall.
On top of that, I would...
Joining us, MS Now Justice and Intelligence reporter Ken Delaney, and MS Now senior legal reporter Lisa Rubin, MS Now White House reporter Laura Barone-Lopez with some new reporting about DHS, and editor-at-large for the 19th and MS Now political contributor Aaron Haynes, and Hofstra University law professor James Sample. Let's start with Don Lemon. Lisa, Don, today, inside of the courthouse, he's being arraigned. He's expected to enter a not guilty plea.
Yes. And beyond his not guilty plea, Katie, I think one of the other things we're looking to see, whether it happens or not, is whether his defense team previews what kinds of motions he intends to bring in the lead up to trial, specifically what kinds of motions to dismiss the indictment. I got a question this morning from a colleague of ours saying, could the judge throw out the indictment against Don Lemon today? And I said, that's not how it works. Once a grand jury indicts, you have to go through a formal motion process unless and until the U.S. Attorney's Office decides they want to withdraw the complaint against Don Lemon, something I don't see happening. Don Lemon is going to have to move to dismiss those charges. And there are a bunch of bases on which he can do it, including First Amendment grounds, but also the facial insufficiency of the charges under what's called the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act, or the FACE Act. That's a bill that was principally designed to protect reproductive health clinics, but also applies to the protection of religious worship. Don Lemon has grounds to argue that he did not, in fact, violate the FACE Act or conspire to violate the FACE Act, in part because it requires either a violent act or a threat of a violent act. And where that might be true for certain of the defendants here, it doesn't appear to be true of Don Lemon. Katie?
All right, James, your take.
Exactly the same as what Lisa said. I mean, I think from a motion standpoint, certainly there's a lot of ground to argue that the act doesn't apply to the actions that were undertaken here. But that's going to be a factual inquiry. Does this amount to impeding? Is this a threat of force? Is this the use of force? Is this a physical restraint? It doesn't seem from the video that we've seen like those criteria, any of those criteria apply. That being said, those are largely fact-based questions, and that's going to require the presentation of some evidence. So that's not a fast track to getting rid of this case. The faster track in a motion to dismiss, I think, is the First Amendment and the idea that just because a journalist was present at a protest, the idea of then stretching the covering of that protest into a criminal prosecution is a significant step.
Yeah, and so Aaron, on that subject, I'm going to use you in your capacity as president of...
For me, Trump was hoping he would break down. He wanted him to fall apart in court, ask for mercy, plead guilty, and maybe even request a pardon. Then Trump could treat him the way he treated Eric Adams, acting like he had control over some he sees a Democrat. I am not even sure if Don Lemon officially supports any party. I don't know, and I am not an expert on him. I don't think he publicly aligns with any party. I don't see him as a pro-Trump, but I don't see him as a strong Democratic partisan. However, Trump seems to view him that way. It's almost like he wanted to capture him and put him on a small stage like a trophy on display. He has done this to political opponents many times, and he likely believed he could do it here too. But Lemon is doing what James and James committed, which is pleading not guilty. Those cases were eventually thrown out. I don't know what will happen in this case, but he is choosing to fight, and that matters. Through this fight, a lot could be revealed. The evidence that comes out clearly shows that this was politically motivated, which would embarrass Trump. At the same time, as mentioned in the clips, Trump understands that even without a guilty verdict, he can drain Lemon's money and resources through a legal process. Still, Lemon is a powerful person. He can handle a case like this and not only generate significant attention for himself, but also strongly push back against Trump and defeat him. In many ways, he already has, because he refused to give in beforehand.